Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Just going through a couple housekeeping things before we get started. Appreciate you joining. I understand everybody's busy, so to take time out of your day to join a webinar means a lot to us. This will be a 45-minute session, which we will be presenting for about 30 minutes, leaving about 10, 15 minutes or so for questions at the end. During any time in the webinar, there is an option to, in the chat, to leave a question, and we'll get to it at the end if we can't get to it during. So my name is Jenny Zell. I'm joined by my colleague, Joe Costello, and we'll be walking through how districts are creating more efficient, equitable, and student-centered schedules, and really how DMSchedules can help make that process smoother. So here's our agenda for today. It's a quick look at what we'll be covering. There's going to start by introducing to you what District Management Group offers, and then we'll go into our approach and the tools that make scheduling simpler but more strategic. But last, and what you're here for, is we'll share a blueprint that you can take back to your schools, which are practical next steps to improve scheduling across your district. So the first few minutes, we're going to start by sharing a couple slides about introducing you to DMG. And that's what you see here is we've been in business. We've started this since 2004. And so for those who might be newer to the district management group, we have been partnering with districts for nearly 25 years. Hundreds of districts across 35 states, which I do believe that number has increased. But our work is about transformational, sustainable improvement in public education by combining proven management techniques with educational best practices. So in other words, we help schools do great work, but more efficiently and at scale, which ties into our mission. And it really comes down to helping districts meet these three objectives: improving student outcomes, strengthening our leadership in our schools, ensuring resources are used strategically. Everything we do, whether it's consulting, professional learning, or our software, it's built around supporting these goals. So these are our offerings. These are our 4 core offerings that we bring together under one umbrella. Together, these offerings help districts move from ideas to execution, from identifying priorities, and then making them real in the classroom. So we'll go through the next few slides, just covering what each of these are in a little bit more detail. So the next one, the first one that we'll start with is DM Council. So this slide highlights our learning and professional development arm. DM Learning, which through DM Council, we bring together district leaders from across the country to learn from one another, share ideas, access best practices through our membership committee. We also have our annual DMG Summit, which, by the way, if you haven't received your registration for, will be held in New York City, February 4th through the 6th. But there's membership calls. There are other times when there's a lot of peer-to-peer innovation and communication. So then there's our professional development work. This is where we help districts and school leaders build capacity through programs such as our Academic ROI Institute, our Secondary Scheduling Institute, and of course our leadership councils for school finance and special education. Finally, with our DM Journal, this is our publication that distills research and real-world experience into practical and actionable articles. We have case studies that have been from our work that we've done over the years. It's just one of the ways that we share what we're learning from districts who are doing, good work across the country. Our next piece of work is with DM Consulting. This is our hands-on advisory service. This is where our team partners directly with districts to take on their biggest strategic challenges. So that might mean specifically strategic planning, budgeting, helping districts prioritize resources and initiatives through our PRISM framework. We also work deeply in areas like staffing and scheduling, special education, MTSS, strategic enrollment planning. The consulting side is really where districts translate their goals into clear, actionable strategies. It often lays the foundation for the work that happens in DMSchedules, which later on, which we'll get to. Which DMSchedules, near and dear to my heart. This is our software and service solution designed specifically for schools. So what we do is we take a lot of the work that you've done in the consulting side, whether that's developing district guidelines and best practices, then we take that information, apply that across your schools, and help to build schedules that raise achievement, improve equity. There's a compliance piece to that, resources, how to use the resources more effectively. Our team works hands-on with schools to create these schedules that reflect these instructional goals. Lastly, through this exciting work is our breakthrough results. These tend to be shorter cycles, which really helps to lead to real measurable outcomes. So whether it's through math, achievement, higher attendance, stronger collaboration among staff, it really does change the entire experience for students and teachers. So last, we'll go through and introduce myself, and then I'll hand it off to Joe. So I help to lead the software solution piece, DMSchedules, where we take this information that we just discussed and put it through the software piece. What I love about my role is that it sits at the intersection of everything DM Group does. Our consulting and learning teams help districts identify those priorities and best practices, and I put it into real-world application. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to pass it off to Joe, who will introduce himself and cover the rest of our agenda.
Terrific. Thanks, Jen. Hello, everyone. So nice to be here with you virtually. As Jen mentioned, my name's Joe Costello. I'm a director with a consulting team at District Management Group. So I wear a couple different hats in the organization. The first primary hat is as a director on the consulting team. So really leading the day-to-day operations of our various consulting engagements, really the projects that I specialize in, strategic planning, strategic budgeting, and then I do a whole lot in our scheduling realm. Both at the elementary and secondary level. So to really think about like how that all sort of fits together, strategic planning, let's get really clear on what our organizations, what our schools and our school districts should be focusing on based on our priorities as organizations, so our stakeholders coming together. And then what are the implications based on that strategy for how we use our resources, whether that's dollars and staff, dollars and FTE from the budgeting side, or how we're investing our time. So that's why scheduling is so near and dear to my heart. In many districts, sometimes time is the most precious resource that we have that we don't think about, and so I think there are some really tremendous opportunities for how we can use our time more effectively. You can see some other details about me and my background, but you're not here for that. You're here for the content that is elementary scheduling best practices. So with that, I'm going to move us forward in our agenda here. Really three parts to the content that I want us to walk through today. As Jen mentioned, if you do have thoughts or questions or reactions, please feel free to drop those in the comments and we'll be able to get to those throughout our presentation, but also at the end of our time during a Q&A session. The other piece, if you do want a copy of these materials, we'll make that available after our time today. So be on the lookout from an email from the DM group account, also with our contact information if you do have specific questions or want to do some follow-up. So with that, let's dive in. The challenge with scheduling. So when you think about why scheduling becomes such a challenge, especially at the elementary level, is that you think about all of these different players who are sort of supporting the elementary education ecosystem, right? You start with your building schedules, your school schedules. So in this example, we have 5 elementary schools, but then you think about all of the different players who have to access student and staff time, right? So special education teachers, your homeroom elementary classroom teachers, maybe your specials rotation, reading teachers, interventionists, all these other kinds of positions. And when you string all of those together, you end up with a really complicated web of schedules that can sometimes be in competition with one another. And really, you need to make sure that every student and staff schedule is directed back to that one coherent building-wide schedule that really lays the foundation for how time can really be used effectively. In our work in the realm of elementary scheduling, there's a few key challenges that emerge because of just the challenges with designing some of those schedules, especially if you don't have a really thoughtful, coherent way of building out those schedules in the first place. Some challenges include fragmented instructional time. We know that 90 minutes for literacy instruction really is best practice, but when we look at that time, maybe there is 90 minutes in total, but it gets fragmented, broken up throughout the day, so students don't really have the full amount of time that they really deserve. Also, insufficient time for intervention, enrichment, various student services. Sometimes an unintended consequence because of that, because scheduling becomes really difficult. We don't end up with the right people supporting our students for those interventions. Inconsistent allocation of time. We see this a lot between grade levels, also across schools, where scheduling challenges, scheduling inconsistencies lead to some students getting access to just more time for math instruction, more time for literacy instruction because of the school that they're attending. Some other ones that I'll run through really quickly here: lack of common planning time for certain teachers, mismatch between needs and resources. You know, some schools get more resources or less, not having the appropriate alignment there. And then a misalignment between schedules and really your district scheduling priorities, your district strategy, the things that you want to be investing all of your resources, not just dollars and people, but also time, and then what's actually happening in practice. Just a couple other stats I wanted to share with you. Over the last 30 or 40 years, believe it or not, education, as we all know, has grown more and more complex as the needs of students have evolved, and also how we support those needs has evolved as well. And one of the unintended consequences, or one of the realities of some of those changes, is that the number of class or non-classroom teachers or non-classroom staff members in our schools has grown astronomically. So this is connected back to that complex web of positions, where oftentimes we add more and more and more positions because the scheduling is really the root cause issue. And we feel like we need more positions when actually better schedules would produce better results for our students. And one other data point that I'll share with you, and this you may recognize this from materials from our last DMG summit, but I think it bears repeating again, where when we think about, this is the last 20 years or so, looking at total spending in public education as it compares to student outcomes. And so you can see the green line running across the top shows inflation adjusted cumulative education spending as compared to inflation. So we're spending more and more and more on education relative to increased costs just more broadly. And yet we're not really seeing the outcomes in terms of improved student scores in both reading and math. So it really suggests to us a need to take a hard look at how we're designing our schools, how we're designing our programs, and think about how we might do things a little bit differently, not only to use our resources more efficiently, but to create better opportunities for our students, more coherent experiences for our students. So it's with that context that we enter into the conversation about what we should do differently. So thinking about creating a blueprint for elementary scheduling, as Jen mentioned, we do a whole bunch of work all across the country in a variety of different content areas. Elementary scheduling and scheduling more broadly is a core area for us. So we're always doing research, looking at emerging best practices, both in terms of what the research says, but also what we're seeing on the ground with different schools and districts. So the materials that I'll be sharing with you now are really a synthesis of those findings and all of that information. And really, there are four key best practices or four key strategies that we wanted to share with you today that really help to design that blueprint for coherent, strong, efficient, strategic elementary schedules. First, this idea of safeguarding core instruction. How you as school and district leaders can clarify your instructional minute guidelines, establish protected time, so make sure students are getting the supports and services that they need, they're not getting pulled out of core instruction, et cetera. And then through that process, expanding it to the district level and really thinking about, okay, what are our non-negotiables as district leaders for what we know needs to be true based on our curriculum, based on the needs of our students, et cetera, and where do we want to give more autonomy for our school-based leaders as well as our teachers to, kind of work the magic of being an educator and really adapt to the needs of their students. So that's really what that first strategy is all about. The next strategy is ensuring opportunities for extra support. So being really clear about when students aren't progressing as well as they need to be, or if they need a little bit of extra help or some additional kind of service or support, where in the schedule should they be getting that so that they can access that support from a content strong educator, whether that's an interventionist or a specialized teacher or something along those lines, both through intervention and enrichment blocks. So we'll talk more about that. The third, and this is really both within schools, but also thinking more broadly across the district, how can you maximize the reach of some of your key specialized positions? So thinking about how you deploy staff members across buildings, if that's appropriate, or even within a building to be able to access multiple grade levels. And then how do you also build in some of those opportunities and structures for collaboration to really enhance staff efficacy? And then we'll close out by talking about how, one of the beautiful things about being in the year 2025, there are a lot of wonderful tech tools out there. And so some key look fors for how you can use some of those technology tools to take the burden off of your admin team to really build these schedules and make sure that you have the data at your fingertips to know that students are getting the services and supports that they need in a way that's efficient and strategic for the district. So I'm going to go through each one of these scheduling strategies one by one to talk a little bit more about exactly what we mean by that. So the first one, this idea of safeguarding core instruction, getting really clear on what the non-negotiables, what the scheduling guidelines should be for your elementary schools, starts with specifying which subjects should be taught at grade levels. So thinking about, okay, where do we want to be really clear about what should be happening across all grade levels, what should be specialized in certain grade levels but not others, where should schools be consistent with one another, where can schools deviate and have a little bit more autonomy. And then once you're clear on what should be taught, take it that next step, right? How much time should be devoted for different kinds of instruction? This should very much be connected to the curriculum and materials that you're using to make sure that students are getting sufficient time in various content areas to achieve the learning that we want for them. And then think through how you should really be defining your service rules. So which subjects is it okay for different other support positions to push in to provide support for students individually? Are there other times where it's okay for students to be pulled out? And then which blocks really is it important that students are all there in one place because they all need to get that first bite at that core instruction. But going through those three steps really sets you up to think in a really systematic way about what it is we want to teach, how much time we should devote, and then what the rules are for how students access during that time. Now, you can take it a step further and really think through how you can make some of this guidance be a little bit more detailed. So on this next slide, my animation's got a little messed up there. There are different degrees of specificity that you could build into some of those guidelines. Now, what you see on the far left side of the screen is what we see in honestly most schools and most districts out there, where maybe there's like, okay, we've locked down lunch and recess, we're good there, and we know when our specials rotation is going to happen because like that's too chaotic, and like we need to make sure we have one set scheduled for that. But really, everything else is like it's up to the discretion of the classroom teacher for how much time they want to spend on certain content areas or not. And in most situations, that's okay. We have amazing educators in our classrooms doing incredible things. But one of the findings from our work is that when we look at all of the schedules of all different teachers, there's some pretty huge differences in terms of how much time students get to spend in certain content areas. Some students get 45 minutes of math, others get 120 minutes of math, and it's really based on the preferences of the teacher and not so much district guidelines. So that evolving specificity is really our baseline best practice for elementary scheduling. Let's get really clear about how much time should be dedicated to some of these core content areas that we know research tells us students need in order to be successful. 90 minutes for ELA, 60 minutes for math, again, connected to your curriculum and your materials. But then you can take that guideline or that guidance a step further, especially if you have other kinds of interventionists or specialists who need to plug in, breaking down how the time within that block should really be used. And there could be some wiggle room in terms of what that looks like on any given day over the course of a cycle, et cetera. But the key takeaway here, you can see it's really small writing, so I apologize for that. But it's really thinking about the independent work and like the whole class versus the student practice time, because that's getting really clear about, okay, we need to preserve that whole class instruction. We need all of our students there. We don't want our specialists coming in to pull students out during that whole class instruction. So being really clear about when within that larger block, students can and should be receiving some of those additional services that they might need. So that's really the thinking there. Let's get really clear on what those guidelines for instruction could be to make sure that students have access to these different kinds of supports. And there's just greater clarity and communication for other staff members in the buildings. Remember that complex web of schedules for when those different positions should be accessing various students. The next best practices idea of ensuring opportunities for extra support. Now, this is thankfully taken off across the country. Just about every single school out there has some form of intervention or enrichment. Maybe it's an RTI block, maybe it's an MTSS block, WIN blocks, flex blocks, all these different forms of similar sorts of ideas. How do we make sure students with additional learning needs get access to supports from a content-strong teacher? Now, what you're looking at here is using our framework for an elementary schedule where each column represents a different grade level. What you're seeing with how we design this schedule, though, is to stagger those intervention blocks. I know it sounds pretty basic, but you'd be shocked at how many schools out there, and maybe even schools in your district, that don't have this in place. But this allows that content-strong interventionist to access all students across grade levels during a designated time. So they're not pulling students out randomly throughout the day. And so this allows for that guaranteed additional 30 minutes of targeted intervention, no additional cost for providing those interventions because you're using your existing staff members more effectively. And the other benefit with this, especially if you're a school that has multiple sections within a grade level, so multiple sections of second grade or third grade, et cetera, it allows dynamic grouping across that grade level. So if you have your intervention/enrichment block at the same time for all second graders, that interventionist can pull students with similar needs together to provide those supports in a really efficient and effective way. So really making sure that you're taking full advantage of those intervention blocks. Similar to that, this idea of maximizing the impact or the reach of staff members, there are a few key things that you can do to really boost how you're deploying your various staff members. This is kind of what I was getting to previously, but delineating in the schedule whole group instruction versus small group class time. That way, it's really clear for when interventionists or specialized positions should be providing some of those different kinds of services. So it basically unlocks more time within the schedule for when some of those positions can access students. We hear all the time, just with the increasing needs of students, academically behind potentially, maybe there's a disability thrown in there, maybe there's linguistic needs. You have a full matrix of all these different needs that students have. And so time is really precious. So having more specificity in the schedule where you're delineating between the kinds of instruction can be really powerful to make sure you're safeguarding the most important times for students to be all together to get that initial delivery of content. Some other creative ideas. This is really more focused on specials teachers, so your art, music, PE, et cetera. But thinking about more creative ways of regrouping students to be able to leverage some of those positions more strategically or more effectively. Oftentimes we lock ourselves into, okay, we have, Miss Ezel's second grade class who's all going to move together as one cohort throughout the day. When actually during specials time, maybe there is an opportunity to mix and match students from different classrooms, kind of builds camaraderie between classrooms, which can be really nice, depending on how you manage it. But it allows you to have a slightly more efficient sort of specials rotation, extend the reach of some of those staff members. Maybe it even would unlock an FTE for like a different kind of support or a different kind of program. Maybe that's where that magical FTE that you've been looking for can come from to be able to provide, like world language or something along those lines. So just thinking really creatively about how you use those staff members. Similar to that, thinking about how you can leverage shared staff across schools. It's a challenging thing, especially if your schools are far apart. And I'm a former high school teacher. I know you want your teachers, you want your staff members to be contained in one building. That's how you really build that community. However, for some specialized positions where maybe they're only supporting a handful of students, there could be some advantages to having that position support multiple schools. Having a really clear schedule that delineates exactly when and where those positions should be allows you to use some of those staff members more flexibly. and expand the caseloads of some of those positions within reason, right? Not talking about a crazy caseload, but really maximizing the reach of some of those positions. And then the last piece with this, when you think about those individual kinds of positions, thinking about how you can maximize their direct service time with students. So getting really clear on the full set of responsibilities that some of those positions have, make sure that you're streamlining certain responsibilities, but then also taking a really careful, close look at group size, and getting to the heart of, why are group sizes the way that they are? Oftentimes what we see is we have specialists working with groups of like 1 or 2 students, when actually they could be working with groups of 3 or 4 students, and really the services are just as good, still within educational best practices. And then if you think about it from like a mathematical standpoint, you've like doubled the capacity of your staff, which again unlocks FTE to be used in other areas. But you can only do that if you have a really clear, organized schedule that allows for the optimization of providing some of those different kinds of supports. The last strategy I wanted to touch on here is this idea of using tools that make scheduling simple. What you're looking at on the screen is what we see, especially on the consulting side. We work with schools and districts all over the place, and we ask for, usually the first request from us is like, okay, send us your schedules, whatever you have, so that we can get a sense of what's currently going on. And we see every form of schedule, from like pictures of whiteboards, pictures of Post-it notes that get shuffled around, down to these really detailed Excel spreadsheets, which as an Excel guy takes forever to do all the formatting. And then you're like, oh no, I'm off by a couple minutes. Now I got to like shift all the little boxes down. It takes up a lot of time and doesn't really lead to strong outcomes. So instead, take a look around at the different kinds of scheduling software that's out there. So obviously, Jen mentioned we have our scheduling software. There are other solutions out there. You should absolutely be using one. In a lot of cases, sometimes the power schools of the world don't have great options for elementary. So there are some other options. Our DMSchedules is a solid one. But these are the details that you should be looking for as you're evaluating those tools, right? Really, really clear delineation of subjects that should be taught, amount of time that each of those subjects should be spending on different content areas. And then you should have a really clear visual of the homeroom teacher schedule, specials rotation, interventionist schedules. That way you know exactly where all of your staff members are and how all of your students are guaranteed access to different kinds of services. That's where the bar should be set as you're evaluating scheduling tools that are out there. Now, I would take it a step further for some of those more specialized positions. So again, very small charts here. Apologize for that. What you're looking at, though, 2 different kinds of data. On the left-hand side, we're looking at direct service. So particularly for some of those specialized positions, we want to know how much time those positions are spending with students. That's why people got into the work. That's why we want those positions in our schools. They should be spending time with students, and your scheduling software should be able to give you that level of granular detail, so that when you look at how staff members are spending their time, you know that, okay, wow, like right now this says our average direct service is about 55%. We should be up closer to 60%, so we can really maximize the time that our staff members are spending with students. And whether that's by streamlining roles and responsibilities or figuring out what's getting in the way, that allows you to improve those services. The other detail related to direct service is thinking about what those group sizes are. Your scheduling software should give you that level of granular detail, so that you can say, okay, the expectation for this kind of service, for like a reading intervention, reading small groups, et cetera, we should be working with like 4 to 5 students at a time. So if you're looking at the data and you're seeing the averages are down in the like 1 to 2 students, that has a huge impact on staffing needs for the school, and can start the questions about why is it that we're not able to work with slightly larger groups of students to really maximize the impact of or maximize the reach of our staff members. So again, your scheduling software should do that for you. Options exist out there, but that's the level of data, the level of detail that allows you to really manage the resources effectively and make sure that students are getting the supports that they really need. But ultimately, This approach, not just the scheduling software, but those other best practices allow you to tick off some really key benefits that allow you to then maximize instruction for students while using staff more efficiently, right? That daily common planning time, uninterrupted ELA and math blocks, you know exactly how much time students are getting access to core content areas with an idea of how that time is being used, equitable access to intervention and enrichment, specials, et cetera. And then you have the structures built into the schedule so that it's clear when staff members are collaborating with one another. So having that common time for specials by grade level allows for that collaboration. And also you have the opportunities for staff members to regroup students based on identified need and specific lessons, et cetera. So that's the main takeaways there. The last portion of this presentation, I just wanted to touch on briefly, how we would typically approach this. So as Jen and I have both alluded to, there's sort of two prongs that we take for this kind of work, just to give you like a window inside to how we think about these kinds of challenges. If you're a school or district that you have a really good idea of exactly what your challenges are and what the barriers are that's preventing really strong schedules. We have a wonderful scheduling software that really guides you through developing your schedules and then allows you to layer on top of it all of those special education or related service providers, specialist interventionist schedules on top of those homeroom schedules. So that's an option. And then the other service that we provide is more of a consulting support, which really we become your thought partners. And it's like, hey, let's get to the bottom of what the current state of affairs are in all of your elementary schools, because that allows us to have a fact-based conversation about what's really going on, especially if you're a district that has multiple or many elementary schools and you need to build consensus around the need to tighten things up and do things a little bit more consistently. You really need to have a common set of facts that you're starting from. And then from there, we can transition you into, let's identify those priorities for our schedule. What does that mean for instructional time for different content areas? What does that mean for other design elements, intervention, enrichment blocks, et cetera, rotations for specials? What should that broader architecture for the schedule look like? So the project goals for one of our elementary scheduling consulting projects really threefold. So provide that really detailed, clear assessment of current staffing and scheduling practices. Again, just getting clear on what's the current state of affairs. If we're going to have conversations about how we're going to do things differently, let's get really clear on how we're currently doing things so that we can hold on to the things that are working really well, but expose some of the opportunities to do things a little bit better. And then with the learnings from that assessment, codify district-wide scheduling priorities and clarify what the level of autonomy or the flexibility should be within buildings. And then with that information, with that like scheduling strategy in place, what should implementation look like? How might you build those schedules and then create goals for those schedules so you can look back to say, yeah, we set these objectives for our schedules and we know that we're hitting every single one of them. We are confident we're using our staff efficiently, but more importantly, kids are getting access to the services that they really need. We break down the work into really three phases: scheduling, opportunity review. Let's get that information. Let's do that fact finding. Let's bring a team together, a guiding coalition, if you will, that can digest that information and then use it to develop that schedule strategy and then put it into practice. Design those schedules using a scheduling software, a scheduling tool, so that you can look back on those schedules once they're complete to know that they're delivering the results that you want. So additional information for those phases of work, et cetera, and then the details related to the designing and implementing those schedules. We'll send all these materials to you after the call if you have more specific thoughts or questions related to exactly what this work would look like. But with that, I'm going to pass things back to Jen to close us out and open up for questions.
Right, exactly. This will be a QR code. This is if you wanted to get into a consultation with us for either one, for the consulting work or scheduling information. If you just use your phone and take a picture, then you'll get put to that site. And in the meantime, we'll open it up. Is there anything that made sense to you? Does this all sound relevant to kind of the issues that you're facing? We can open it up. If anybody feels brave enough to ask a question, now is the time, or put it in the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I had one question come in that was about the typical timeline for this kind of an effort, and really when the best time to do this work would be. Great question. Number one, it really depends on the district. I think depending on your scheduling needs and like what the current state of schedules are in your schools, the timeline can vary a little bit. We would typically recommend, if you're going to do more of this like opportunity, like this data deep dive, even if you're going to do it all on your own, you want to do that with enough lead time so that you're developing the schedules or developing the new design for schedules really in like the early springtime. That way, if you need to provide more professional learning for staff members or things like that, you have sufficient time to do that before the end of the school year and before you really start implementing those new schedules. Mm-hmm. So great question. Any other questions? Again, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand and we can like pull you into our little webinar screen here and allow you to talk.
Okay. Well, appreciate your time. I think we'll wrap up here then at this stage. And this will all be sent to you. And hopefully we'll be talking with you in the future. Reach out with any questions that you have. And thanks for taking your time.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye.